Hey guys, how's it going? BrettFX here. So this is going to be kind of an informal video. We're going to do this all in as one take, as best as we possibly can. So these are basically just my thoughts on Squad Conquest, the direction that DICE is taking Squad Conquest. I realize that I am not a map designer. I don't know the ins and outs completely when it comes to trying to balance a new map, but I do have a lot of experience as a competitive player and as a player who plays the maps to a point where we find every possible break, glitch, bug, advantage, whatever you want to call it. I'm the type of player, and many of those that are probably going to be watching this are too, that will find those and will exploit those because we want to win. It's not because we're cheap. It's not because we're cheating. It's because we are using the tools that are given to us to win the maps. So when I'm talking about these maps, the direction of Squad Conquest, what we have gotten here recently, that's my point of view. That's the lens that I'm looking through this on, is that I am a competitive player, a competitive caster who watched and has played many hours of competitive gameplay and have played on both the worst and the best of the maps that Battlefield has had to offer. And this is what I'm seeing coming out right now for Squad Conquest. So to get right on into it, I just want to go ahead and take a look at the existing maps that we have. So right here we have Arras, and we're going to go through what I think is probably the better of all the maps so far that are releasing to the worst of the maps so far that we have. More or less. So Arras here is probably my favorite map, both to play and to watch. I think that it is the most balanced out of all of the maps. Hamada is a very close second, depending on the team skill. And that's another thing, too, that I think has to be taken into account here, is the fact that the team skill is going to impact the way these games are played, because now you're not dealing with 64 players. It's not a 32 versus 32. It's not a 16 versus 16. You're talking about 8 versus 8. You're getting down to the nitty-gritty. Each player has to pull their weight. And if one falters, it's going to make a big impact within the match. That's something that I don't think that DICE knows how to account for. DICE has been traditionally a large format style of play, and because of that, they don't know how to match up properly players with similar skill levels. So let's go ahead and into Arras here. This is, like I said before, probably one of the more balanced maps of them all. I do know that you can get spawn trapped in here. Believe me, I've seen it many times before as well. But I've also seen some of the best matches happening on this map. And there's a few things that I want to point out that I think really makes this a good Squad Conquest, and really emphasizing Conquest, because this map allows for a vehicle to be played. Now, a lot of you guys may think, especially some of you who haven't been around in the competitive days of Battlefield 2, 3, 2142, that type of thing, AV8s and 12v12s were pretty much what was the dominant, like, really good competitive play. Yes, the 32s were still around. Those were still very relevant as well. But what I'm talking about is the very small focused gameplay, but still combined arms. And I think this map encapsulates that pretty well. You have a lot of room to the north side of the map in order for vehicles to kind of go back and forth through those flags. They have an opportunity to really make an impact up there. They can also go over here to Bravo. We have seen them play into B and inside the town, but those are a little bit more dangerous. You know, that the infantry kind of can get away from the vehicles a little bit there and do a little bit more damage to them if the vehicles aren't careful. Yes, the vehicles can have a big impact and overwhelm the infantry, but if the infantry are ready, and we have seen that before, they can take them down extremely fast. But this is a fairly balanced map in my opinion, and it's a very fun map. It gives a lot of room for infantry to roam around the map. It gives enough there for the tanks to be able to move around as well. You have the objective spaced out well enough to where one team can't dominate the entire map by owning one objective. You know, just because B is the high ground in this map. That does not mean that they're going to be able to shoot and take over on A or onto C. They actually have to get the tank or players over there in order to make a difference. And I think that that's one of the really good features of this map, is it's big enough, not too big, but it is big enough to where it does take some really good coordination from your team. It does take a really good, just mindset of knowledge of how to play the map. It's not about just getting all the frags. You have to set up and you have to make sure that you're positioned properly, because you can get flanked in this map. And that's something that I'm going to be bringing up quite a bit here in this video, is the ability to flank the other teams, and you have that here in this map. So moving on into Hamada. Now this is a little bit of a smaller map, but it definitely has a lot of the same things that Aras had. The biggest one being the fact that it has a vehicle. But it also has areas that you can flank from. And the north side of the map, that is a very popular area for both infantry and tanks to go ahead and push from A to C, or from C down to A if they can't get into that B flag. B is a very tough cookie to crack. It's very difficult to get in there, especially if a team has about a squad to a squad and a half set up with their guns already locked onto whatever flag that you're going to be pushing from. So to be able to have flank routes is really important, because it means that, one, the dominant team has to stretch themselves thin, and it also means that it gives an opportunity for the team getting dominated to get out and to push onto another flag. A really good example of this, and this is if you came from Battlefield 3, if you played Grand Bazaar, that was a map that if you looked at it, you were like, oh my god, Brett, that is a terrible example. It's literally a linear map with 3 lanes. Yeah, but if you were spawn trapped on that map, there were ways that you could get out if you pushed as a team. Did it hurt? Absolutely. Was it possible for you to be spawn trapped the entire time? Yes. But it took an incredibly good team or an incredibly bad team on the other side in order for it to happen. I have been on both sides of that, and I have fought my way out of that particular map, because they gave flank routes, they gave ways to where you had enough cover and you had enough concealment to where you could make it out, and the other team really had to struggle in order to keep you held in, unless they just had the best players possible to be able to get 5 or 8 man sweeps. So back onto point here, Hamada, it does allow for a vehicle. It is big enough that you have areas that you can flank from. It is a triangular map, much like what we saw in Aras, and it does allow for some really good rotations from infantry players. Typically, Hamada is your biggest back and forth map that we have during our competitive games. There's many casts where even if a team does get spawn trapped for a little bit, they are eventually able to make their way out. Now, that's not to say that it happens every time, but the majority of the time, teams are able to get out. And because of this, you do have the ability for teams to make comebacks. You do have the ability for teams to where they can make mistakes, but still, it's not the end of the day if they do get spawn trapped. Now, on this map right here, I do like to point out the fact that even though it does look like it's a little bit more dominated there in the B site, infantry players can get around it and can sneak around fairly easily. So this map, I think, is a really good example of it being able to be small, but because the high point is in the middle of the map the way it is, and because there are multiple high points with towers spotted around the map, as well as the fact that you're on a mountaintop with it slowly scaling down towards the outside, it allows for you to have that cover in order to get out and get away from that high ground. Hamada is probably my second favorite map. Now over onto the maps that I just think don't work. So everybody who has played competitively knows Rotterdam is garbage. It's bad. It's not the worst one, but it's rough. And this map we see very lopsided games, both competitively and in public play. I would say that probably 80% of the time when I play this in public, it ends in a spawn trap. Most of the competitive games that I play, or I'm sorry, that I watch while casting, it does end in about a 80 to 90, up towards to 100 tickets or more advantage for one of the teams. Now, there are many things that are wrong with this map. One of the most notable ones is the fact that the spawns make absolutely no sense whatsoever. If you look over there on the Allied side of the map, you're going to have a very narrow area to come out onto that C flag. And then once you do get to Charlie, you literally have 3 narrow lanes in order to make your way to that Bravo flag. Really easy to choke point those flares, and really the only way that you can bust out of there is a lot of smokes and a lot of persistence and just overwhelming the other team, both with getting revives in the smoke and by trying to overwhelm them with just pure force. We're talking about 6 to 7, sometimes even 8-man pushes with medics just to get out of one of these lanes working together at the very start of the match. Now, I'm not saying that that is a terrible thing to have in a game. Like, you know, having those kinds of breakouts are pretty interesting. But the problem is that this map lends itself to one type of play. It's the best play. It's the safest play, and it's the play that you're going to be seeing mostly. And that's boring to watch. Very boring to watch. Now, on the other side of the map for the for the Axis team, and I don't know what they were thinking when they did this. But the spawns initially do allow you to go up to that A flag, actually to the north of the A flag. But after that, the home spawns are going to be all the way into the back, behind the bridge, where you have to cross a river once the bridge is exploded. Why this made it past their designs, I don't know. Okay, maybe they threw the map together really fast, but I mean, really, guys? Can you not see that that's going to be a terrible decision right away? I could look at that in 5 minutes and tell you this isn't going to work. And it doesn't. You do end up with a lot of spawn traps on this side of the map. You end up with a lot of situations to where teams just cannot break out. If they lose that A flag and they don't have control of Bravo, they end up in a 3-cap situation. They have less than 3 lanes to come out. Okay, they have 1. And a lot of times, players are able to take them out before they can get even up onto the other side of the map in order to make their way to A. Once they do make it on the land, then they have to make it through 3 choke points in order to get over to Alpha. And these are small choke points. Easy to set up crossfires, and the fact that you have both an ammo dump and a health dump on the other side of Alpha means that the defenders will be able to stay strong and they can stay supplied infinitely. They try and break over onto Bravo, you're going to have just as big of a problem, because even though you make it out to open ground, that's all you have. It's open ground. There's no cover. There's nothing there for players to move. You are literally hoping that they don't see you through smoke in order to leak through. It's a terrible, terrible place to be. This map is probably one of the most frustrating because it does have a lot of potential. And the fact that it doesn't have a tank on it means that it is going to be infantry-centric. But at the time, we only had 3 maps. It was Arras, Hamada, and Rotterdam. And we had 2 vehicles, or 2 maps that had 2 vehicles. So it looked like, alright, Conquest, it's coming back. It may be a little bit rough right now, but they'll figure out the map design. It's got to get better than this. And you know what? We're probably going to have a pretty good mix of infantry and vehicle maps. Maybe a little bit heavier on the vehicle maps, but that's the way it should be. But we get our next map. Fiel. And this is another one to where I feel like they're throwing content at us just to throw content at us. This is something that looks like was put together in an afternoon. Maybe played a couple of times through the week. Finalized on a Thursday. Looked at one more time on a Friday. And packaged up and sent out for the weekend. It's okay for infantry. Public games are not that bad. We do see a pretty good mix, at least I do when I play public games. Probably about a 60% time that this ends in a complete base rape. Competitive play was a pretty big disaster. I've seen probably about 10 scrims on this map, and it was not good. I know that the team levels probably had a little bit to play into it, but you can't just have it to where both teams have to be exactly equal in order to make the map work. Okay, there's got to be other ways than just raw gun skill for a team to be able to compete. And not just competitively, I'm talking about publicly. There's more to Battlefield than raw gun skill, and it's just not shown here on this map. Again, we're seeing no vehicles. This is an infantry-only mode. This is an infantry-only map, and it's really just down to the choke points. Over and over and over again, it comes back to the same thing: choke points. And that's just boring at the end of the day. I mean, I really don't have much to say about this map just because it is so bad. Typically, when I am on the, I believe it's the Axis side, I do get pretty much spawn capped the entire time. I have a little bit more luck on the Allied team, but it has happened. And I do a lot of spawn trapping on this map as well. A lot of open areas over there onto A. Yes, you can kind of flank out, but it can be contained. Over on the C, though, on the other hand, there's just not a whole lot of places that you can leak out. You can try and go over to Bravo, but some really good placement from mines, as well as some good MMGs, and you're pretty much stalled out. Not to say that some really good players can't push their way out, because they absolutely can. But for the general pop, it's just not a good map. Over onto Devastation. Now, there seems to be a little bit of a trend that we're seeing now, because this is, well, technically, I would have to say, let me back up real quick. Al Sudan did come out after this. I didn't put Al Sudan in this video because, in my opinion, it is utter garbage and doesn't even really need to be mentioned. There is nothing about that map that resembles Squad Conquest. It is a domination map, and for whatever reason, they thought that that would suffice. It is horrible and should be burned. Like, forever. It's terrible. It is the worst map out of all of the maps that we have currently. Now, on to Devastation. My biggest problem with Devastation is not necessarily the fact that it is linear, because linear maps do work. There have been maps in the past that have worked really well for 5v5s and 8v8s that were fairly linear throughout the entire game. Examples of this, I would say, from my past would be something like Zabad, very linear map. If you look at Metro, very linear map. Even things like Firestorm, it's a very linear map. I mean, you start on one end, they start on the other end, and the flags are literally all in a row. But this one right here, the issue is that there's not a whole lot of flanking routes. If they would open up the sides just a little bit and allow players to get out and try and go around for a back flag, it would help this out tremendously. But they don't. They really force you into this narrow area in order to play. And yes, you can go on the sides of the church, but the footsteps are so loud and you are so close that it is very easy to clean up players that are trying to leak out to each of the sides. I think if they were able to bring out the boundaries, you know, another building or two to each side, that would help out tremendously. And it would absolutely allow both cover and concealment for those players to get around for those back caps. This map, unfortunately, it seems to end every single time in a spawn camp. I don't think I've ever finished out this map so far where we weren't being either based or we were basing the other team. Now, this is for public play. I do not play competitively, and I have not seen this one being played for competitively in scrims. So I can't speak to that. But so far, out of probably the 24 times that I have played this map, it has ended very, very poorly and just really not that fun. Now over here onto Narvik, this is the last and final map here before we go on to some more of my suggestions that I do have. Narvik is another one that is extremely linear, and it suffers from the fact that players cannot get out in order to just cap another flag. I think that is much, much worse on the C side of the map. A side, you can get out. It's a little bit easier, although if they have players set up correctly on the hills back over there towards B, they can pretty much lock you in. I know that I was playing with a couple of players who were doing a really good job as fraggers, and so I let them basically sit around A and just get all the kills that they possibly could, and then I sat back on Bravo and just cleaned up the stragglers that were trying to leak out. And it had to have been frustrating for the other team because they were doing everything that they can, and they stuck in there, and God bless their souls. They stuck in there, and they end up losing 150 tickets to 0. They only took 10 tickets off of us. That's pretty terrible. Now, on the other side of the map, if you look at C, it's the worst. You can't expect teams to be able to get out of that. That is impossible. And time again, I've played this map probably about 24 times. You can't get out of this if you're spawn trapped. It is the worst. I have both been in a situation where I was trapped and where I wasn't. And in this situation on Narvik, I think, again, it would help if it was expanded out to the sides. Why can't I go down the hill to the south and run to try and get over to A if I'm over on the C side of the map? Why can't I push up into the mountains more over to the north and get around to that B flag? Open up the flanks of the map. Allow the infantry to move. And the last thing on this map that I want to mention is the fact that there are no tanks. This is the 4th map that has come out now in a row where we have not seen a vehicle in play. And again, this is supposed to be squad conquest. Okay? This isn't squad domination. This is squad conquest. Conquest comes with the notion that you are going to be seeing some vehicles being played. I feel like right now we are going to be seeing DICE pushing more towards this infantry-only style for squad conquest. I think that they are getting extremely lazy in their map design, and they're just stretched too thin. They're trying to fix bugs. Apparently there's going to be a 5v5 mode that's supposed to come out later on. They're talking about bringing in more and more maps. They have the Pacific DLC, which is going to be launching later on this year. They are over their heads at the moment in terms of just time management and where they're going to be putting their resources. And as a result of that, we're getting really, really shoddy maps for this mode that has so much potential. So that's what we have right now. So let's go into what I am suggesting for some new versions. So the first one we have is Arras. Now, Arras, I already said, was pretty darn decent, but I think there's some issues with the map, just with it being so open. I think there are some places that you can definitely make it more fun for the infantry players in both an urban setting, as well as like what we talked about with Hamada, where the tank is kind of skirted away from certain areas. You know, the tank doesn't really play on Bravo. It plays more towards that C and A section. So in this version of Arras, and granted, guys, every one of these versions you guys may absolutely hate, and that's perfectly fine. This is my opinion, and this is just the direction I would kind of like to see Squad Conquest go. And again, I am not a developer. I am not a map designer. I don't know if this would be balanced, but to me, and from my experience of both a player and a caster, this feels like it could have some merit with some tweaking being done. Of course, things should be added in certain areas, and some things may be taken away. But overall, I think this would be some pretty cool stuff. So as you can see right now, we're going to be using C up in the top right inside the little barn house area, and A over in the top left. Both of those sections are going to be able to have some small villages that you can fight in and amongst the flag. It's not out in an open area. You can absolutely add some fortifications both around there as well. And in the you know, going to those flags, you can also add some fortifications, especially over there onto the A flag. That section, you can absolutely add in fortifications in between the areas, put in some trenches, whatever it may be. Just add in some cover for those players trying to transition to and from those areas. Another thing is that this is in a triangular situation, so that you're going to be having some really good rotations that could potentially come out of this. Now, the B flag is going to be the focal point of this map. This is where you're going to be seeing the majority of the infantry clashing together. The tanks can make their way up on top of Bravo, but for the most part, this is where you're going to be seeing the infantry really starting to shine. And this is where you're going to be seeing some really fun moments popping out, both as a caster and the viewers being able to watch, and both as a player. This is going to be a spot where it can really get dicey, and you can see some teams mixing it up and having a lot of fun, both with the destruction of the buildings, being able to open up new routes, being able to open up new sight lines, and the ability for some really cool basically spawn bombs to come in there. vehicles could potentially go onto the B flag, but it is going to be dangerous. So you would typically see the vehicles playing out more towards the north side of the map, kind of like what we see right now with the Ross, but also they do have the ability to kind of come on down out of their spawn and play towards the south if they wanted to get some long range shots onto that B flag and potentially cut off some reinforcements coming out of the main spawn. Of course, they will be having their home flag, which would be C over there for the Axis side, or I'm sorry, A for the Axis side, C for the Allied side. So they are going to have the ability to, at the very least, get to a home flag and have something that they can hold on to. But with the way the spawns are going to be on this map, and this is going to be something that I do for just about every map, there is going to be another route that they can go out on to prevent a spawn trap. Now, spawn traps will be possible on all of these maps, I believe, but it is going to be incredibly difficult in order to make that happen. There's just so much ground that has to be covered. So here's my last section here on a Ross. Now this one is a little bit different. It does include the C flag, and this is more of a like an elongated triangle. Okay, so that A and B flag are going to be very close together, and this is where we're going to be focusing a lot of infantry play. The tanks are kind of meant to be over onto the C side of the map, and they're going to be clashing in and around that C site. They can come up to A and B. They can have a little bit of fun going back and forth, support their teams a little bit, but primarily their focus is going to be around Charlie and in the middle of the map. They're going to try and call out as much of the movement as possible. They're going to try and get a little bit of chip damage on those infantry players, but for the most part, they will not be going up into A and B unless they want to risk a whole lot. Now, this does give the infantry players an opportunity to really start to shine and have some good battles going back and forth between that A and B site. You got a lot of buildings in between the two. You have a lot of opportunities for holds, defends, and some pretty interesting plays that might come out there with some flanks. If you notice, they will be able to go all the way up and around the church. Now, you may think, why would anybody actually go all the way up there? Well, right now, with these linear maps, it's very difficult to, or it's not very difficult to clean up and get full squad wipes. Whereas this one right here, if a guy leaks out to that church, a spawn bomb happens, they may lose their home flag on Alpha if they're the Axis team, but then they can spawn bomb on the church and push down into Bravo and flip the map. And this is something that really is going to be something fun to watch and fun to play, because it gives teams an opportunity to come out with some really cool strategies and really on the fly thinking from these guys. It's not just about killing as much as possible. It's about outthinking the other team and also being a good fragger. Over here on Hamada, this is completely different than what we had talked about previously of where the map is at. Now, I think that Hamada has a lot of potential both as a regular conquest map and as a squad conquest map if we move to the main part of the map. So this is the main section that you do see with the 4 flags, and I think there's a lot of potential here that is just being wasted, especially since on the regular conquest map you have to cross the bridge, but on squad conquest, as I said before with that tower, it does limit the areas that you can actually play in. Now this map would obviously be a tank playground. You're going to be able to have really good sight lines. You're going to be able to maneuver just about anywhere on the map. There's not going to be a whole lot of places, maybe up there on the Bravo and a couple of places on A where it's going to be really difficult to maneuver around. But for the most part, the tanks are going to be able to just push wherever they want. And it's really going to come down to the infantry players and the other tanker in order to stop that from happening. Obviously, infantry players will need to be using smoke to maneuver around the map, but there are a lot of ridges, hills, and valleys for these guys to move around in. Another thing that I want to note is the fact that we have a lot of area for flanking. Over onto the C flag, you can go very, very deep south in order to go all the way around, possibly even skipping C and going straight up to that Bravo flag. Over on the A side, you do have an opportunity to go up to the north side of A, maybe hide out a squad or two in order to push back in. But both of these flags over there on Alpha and Bravo are going to be close to your main spawn. That does allow you to be able to exert a pretty decent amount of control over them and help you out with those spawn traps. But if you do end up in a situation where you are getting 3-capped and you can't get out to that Bravo or that Alpha flag for home, there is a lot of space that you can cover. You can go out to that C flag. You can try and flank around. And again, it's going to be very hard for teams to completely bottle up these players. Not impossible, but it will be hard for it to happen. If you have a 5 or 6 man push with some smokes, they're going to be able to flood on out into an area. It's going to be very difficult to clean up every single person, and they will be able to get those revives going on as well. And we have a lot of versions on Hamada. So this is the next version here onto Hamada. Now this is going to be focusing on the current position. I believe this is going to be C flag on regular conquest. A is going to be moved over into some trenches, and then you do see B up into that the building, the bombed out building areas. So in this instance, B flag would definitely be the site that you're going to be fighting over. It's the furthest away from all of your points, and it's going to be a little bit more protected in terms of the backside of that Bravo. So on the very, very north, you do have a narrow area that you can push into for some flanks if you're coming in from the A side, as well as from the C side. You are going to be having a ridge that you can push up onto as well. But for the most part, it's going to be pretty easy to defend on that Bravo flag. So it's going to be a tough nut to crack. So really the fighting is going to be in between that A and C flag, going to be going back and forth quite a bit. And again, I think that tanks would have a lot of really good times on this map. They're going to have a lot of area that they can maneuver around. The C side of the map may have a little bit more of an advantage because of this ridge that's going to be coming up here. But I do think that, again, depending on the positioning of your tanks and the way that your infantry is going to be playing, they can force them out of those positions. And you could potentially go for like an A-B hold, force them back into C, and it's going to be pretty hard to come out of that, I will admit, but definitely possible. Again, there's an area that if you do get control of that C flag or that A flag, there's going to be quite a bit of area that you can kind of flood out of and leak to a back flag. And this is my last iteration of Hamada. So this one right here is going back to some linear play. You might be going, hey Brett, what? You just got done bashing how linear the other maps were, and now you're going to be presenting one. Well, like I said before, linear maps are not bad. They can be some of the most fun maps that are out there. They just have to be done correctly. And they can't be so linear, they can't be so squished down that you're literally fighting in a tunnel. I mean, it's sad to say, but even Metro, to a certain extent, had more lanes that you could leak out of than what we're seeing currently in something like Devastation or even Narvik. So on Hamada right here, as you can see, the home flags are going to be pretty close for both of these teams to go to. You are going to be seeing that B flag right smack dab in the middle of the map, and tanks are going to be going back and forth between with some long range shots on both sides. You do have some pretty decent ridges that you can use, and then of course you do have a bit of a flanking route there to the north that you can get up and around that B flag if you can get by those infantry players. Now, again, this map right here, it's definitely more linear, and this one would be prone to more spawn traps to happen, but if you look at the general area in the space that you're talking about, there are a lot of rocks, a lot of areas that infantry players will be able to use in order to get around. And the terrain is pretty varied, especially over on the C side. That is up onto a hill, so that naturally is going to be able to provide some cover. And over on the A side, you have a little bit of the same as well. Now we head into Rotterdam. So this is something that I was really, really excited about when I heard that Rotterdam was going to be on Squad Conquest. I was like, ooh, there is a lot of potential for this map. I think it could be really, really fun. And I remember talking to Code, the owner of ESB. We were actually talking about this, and we sat down and we kind of looked at some, interesting ideas of what could pop out when the beta came in for a small Conquest version. And this one right here, I think, could be really, really fun to play. So again, every single one of these versions, guys, I'm going to say has a tank. So each one of these has a vehicle. We're going to be able to, at least give one person on each side the ability to have the big boomstick. And this particular map, you would see the tanks playing primarily up there towards that B flag. So traditionally what we see on Rotterdam are the tanks going up to that Bravo flag, or I'm sorry, up towards the north over here on this open area on that side of the docks and fighting it out. And that's where they're probably going to be fighting the most here on this map. That's where they would be fighting most on this particular map. B is going to be smack dab in the middle of that, and some pretty good areas to fight around. Again, you would have to add maybe some fortifications around that, some areas for teams to be able to build up. probably some fortifications to already be there in a situation where those infantry players aren't going to be just trying to build it right out into the open from the start. But I think it could allow for some very, very good gameplay. And of course, the tanks will be able to wrap around and even play a little bit onto that Alpha or Charlie flag. So as you can see, the out of bounds line actually includes the outermost lane going into both of those flags. So it doesn't leave the tank completely out of the fight. He doesn't have to get too cramped up there, but he is going to have to, if he wants to get right into the mix on the flag, he is going to have to commit, and it could be pretty dangerous for him. You will be seeing the infantry players playing primarily, into the middle of the map. I don't know if having the bridge on this one would be good or not. I'm kind of thinking no, cut off the bridge for the most part, because that does allow for a lot of down shots onto that B flag, and I wouldn't want it to be just whoever owns the bridge owns the map. But if you make it so that there's some fortifications there in that middle island section built up, as well as maybe some fortification bridges that we have seen, then that would be pretty darn cool. Have it to where infantry players can kind of cross over in that middle section a lot more, and it should be some pretty decent fights back and forth there. Of course, over on the Alpha flag, you'd have to have some fortifications as well built up, because it is pretty open as it is now. But I could definitely see where C flag would be pretty fun in and amongst those buildings. You do have multiple levels that you can play in, and of course, just the fact that it is going to be very close quarters, I can see that being a very, very fun game. On this one here, you do see a fairly wide area that players are going to be able to spawn in from. This one obviously is going to be a much easier one that they can spawn trap in from, but they would be able to have the opportunity to leak out into the river, maybe go back over to another home flag, or they could just try and go down their outermost lane and get over there to that B site, get maybe a flank or something going down. But again, on both of these sides, A is going to be a little bit less, but definitely on C it would be harder for the tank to get in there to just cause so much havoc. Over on A side, of course, that's pretty much a lost cause, and whatever you do with that, it's just open. Here is the next iteration. So on this one, we're basically just flipping it. We're taking the two flags down, A and C, flipping them up to the top, moving B down. So B flag would primarily be fighting here into the middle of the map in the courtyard. I think this is a pretty fun area to fight in. It could lead to some really interesting gameplay moments. Put in a couple of fortifications, of course, and I think you're going to have some really, really good fights. Up to the north side, again, it allows the tanks to be able to push in, and they will be able to fight over C and A. This would give them a little bit more of a importance up there to the north side of the map, and it would give the tanks a lot more to do on this particular map as well. They won't be as endangered, I don't think, but if the infantry do go inside the buildings, they are going to have to watch out and make sure that they do have at least one repairman with them, because if they get caught out in the open, obviously, especially up there to the north, there's not a whole lot of places that you can kind of hide to real quick, jump out of your tank, and get some repairs going on. Alright, so Fiel is, this is a rough map. I think that overall Fiel is just a really bad map. I don't think that there's much that you can do. This was my attempt to kind of make it a little bit bigger. On this one right here, instead of a tank though, I was thinking putting a plane would be pretty nice. And I don't mean like a big ass bomber, but you could definitely put a plane on here and see how it kind of plays out. He will be able to spot out a lot of these infantry players and do some nice little hit and run tactics throughout the map. Of course, we would need AA guns to be onto the map in positions, kind of neutral positions, not back at home or anything like that, so that the plane can be kind of shoot away, but not so much so that an AA could dominate the entire map. You do see areas over onto C and A flag where they are going to be able to leak out. The spawns are fairly big on this one, and this is just because this map right here, there's so many choke points, there's so many areas where it's just kind of hard to leak out, that I was kind of thinking if you did allow them to basically be able to go out to both to B flag and kind of both over to A and C, you'd have some pretty interesting fights over onto Bravo, and then of course A and C would be your home flags, but that B flag would be kind of like your big focal point for the game. But it wouldn't be too close to that Bravo flag, that the spawns wouldn't be too close to it, that you're just going to be constantly having players on it. So you may back off the allied side of the spawn just a little bit, maybe put in some fortifications in between there to make it less open. But this one right here is going to be rough, because this one I definitely could see some spawn traps happening Teams could push up in some really, really advantageous areas in these choke points and pretty much hold you back to the point where you're just not going to be able to get in onto your home flag, especially over here on the Allied side. That would be pretty rough, I could definitely see. On the Axis side, it's going to be a little bit easier to kind of push on out, but it does kind of boil down to 3 main lanes that you are going to have to come out. And like I said, if you had some good fraggers there, they're going to be able to hold you back. So, you know, Fiel, not really the best of map, I think, just in general, to have as a squad conquest map. Devastation. All right, so definitely not as much, you know, time on Devastation for squad conquest as I do for the other ones, but I have played this quite a bit on regular conquest, and I will say that I have had a lot of ideas for regular conquest, and they kind of bled over into squad conquest as well. I think Devastation, you could use a tank, maybe a stag hound, something that's going to be really light on its feet, able to move around very easily, but it's not going to be the best vehicle on this map. You're not going to be able to dominate. It's going to be kind of like Hamada. Hamada, the tanks are kind of okay. You know, they serve a purpose. They kind of deter infantry players, but for the most part, they're not going to be getting in there in the nitty-gritty and being able to do anything and everything on the map. This is going to be a little bit different, as both of these players or both of these teams are going to be fighting from the flanks, and they're going to have to actually go out wide. So the home flags aren't as pronounced on this one. I guess if you were to call it out, maybe C would be for the Allied side and A would be for the Axis side. But for the most part, you know, it's going to be a fairly even between these teams, and it's just going to be, you know, where you're going to be rotating out the quickest. I think this would be lending itself really, really well to some interesting fights there onto Bravo, but also some pretty balanced fights, I think, onto A and C. You have a lot of cover with those buildings, a lot of area in order to flank around. If you don't want to hit C right away, maybe you want to come at it from the backside, it does allow you to actually rock all the way around Charlie as well as onto Alpha and try and maybe get some flanks going down in that area. A lot of two-story areas that you can get into, especially over on the library side with A. That I could definitely see just being a chaotic infantry mess where, you know, you think you got it cleared out, and the next thing you know, squad pops in out of nowhere, and they're able to, you know, wipe you out. They think it's clear, and then just kind of back and forth because there's going to be so many nooks and crannies. B is going to be your typical B fight. I could definitely see maybe a tank getting on in there and doing a little bit of damage, especially to the west side of that B flag inside the church, where it's a little bit more open. But your tanks are pretty much going to be skirting around the edge. And in this map, you will be able to do it. A is going to be a little bit harder, but I could definitely see where the tanks could play more around the church and around that C flag to try and cut off infantry players that are going to be coming in from those main spawns. And overall, this would definitely be an infantry-focused map, but I think that vehicles could have a place on it. All right, so this is going to be more of a triangular styled map. This one right here, flag is going to be moved over for A. It's a little bit more difficult when I was imagining this of how these flags would actually go down. But I think that, you know, the church doesn't always have to be the focal point. So I think you can use the outside of the church, and just the church itself be kind of a route that you would use to move in between these flags, but not necessarily the focal point of a flag itself. This is going to allow tanks to kind of play maybe in between A and C a little bit. They should be able to kind of cut off reinforcements maybe coming in from Bravo over to Charlie or Bravo up to A. You do see the spawns are going to be spread out fairly wide, so in order to get a spawn trap on this one, you are going to have to cover a lot of ground. And I think on both sides there's going to be plenty of areas, plenty of potential for these players to kind of leak out with these multiple routes and multiple buildings that they could go on into. And then, of course, they do have the areas in order to make those flanks around those C and A and B flags. All right, so I got 3 versions of Narvik here before we get it out on existing maps. And if you guys have stuck around for this long in the video, props to you, because so far it is about 45 minutes long. I may cut this down into multiple parts, so if you hear this piece and it isn't a 2 or 3 parter, well, you know what happened. But this is the first version of Narvik. I think that there's some more that you can do with this map. It is a bit awkward, and I think that no matter what, you are going to have an advantage with high ground. just because there's such a huge discrepancy on it. But this is one of those maps where I think that if you have a wide spawn on each side and you position out those flags kind of in this triangular fashion, that you should be able to kind of limit the just massive advantage that high ground is going to be able to have. B and A flags are going to be the main flags that you're going to be seeing those infantry players kind of fighting over. C will be something that you kind of just you're going to send maybe your tank down there to take control of it, and then the tank's going to kind of float in between the C flag and whatever your home flag is at that time. That kind of allows you maybe a little bit more of, your infantry has better cover up to the north side of the map, and C is going to be more for those nice little tank fights to go back and forth with their support players. All right, so another version here on Narvik. Now this one I pulled back that A flag just a bit next to the bridge. I think that you can use the area around the bridge pretty well. There's some nice little cover there on regular conquest, and of course you can add some stuff into fortifications. You do have a pretty big advantage with that high ground on top of A, so I could definitely see where A would be a very difficult flag in order to capture, just because there is going to be a very good high ground advantage. But C could counter that, as it is going to be your middle flag, so you can kind of have some fights going back and forth there. B is going to be over onto the village down there to the south, so they are going to have some decent buildings in order to fight from, and you're not going to be dominated from that Charlie flag if that allied team does end up capping it. They do have a slight advantage, I think, in this situation where they would be able to cap it first, but maybe you can adjust the flag just a little bit to even it out. But this was kind of the reason why I put C flag there was just that it was more in the middle of those buildings. You're going to have some pretty decent fights going back and forth through it. And as I said, the allied side already has a pretty decent advantage with Alpha, so I didn't want to put the C flag too close to that B flag, having that high ground advantage as well over onto that side. And this is the last suggestion that I had on Narvik. And on this one right here, you're going to be seeing A back over there onto the bridge. C is going to be pushed up a little bit more towards the north, though, and B is going to be pushed up to the north as well, more towards the typical axis spawn. So this one right here, I was kind of thinking, maybe we have both that A and B section is going to be closer to the main spawns, and C is going to be a little bit more out there. I don't think you're going to be having too much of an issue with on the cap itself, on the flag cap itself, of high ground dominating any particular spots, because obviously C flag is going to be much further away. And again, maybe adjust it down just a little bit, but it's going to be in a situation where you're not going to be able to shoot from Charlie to A unless maybe you're using a sniper rifle or something like that. There is going to be some obstructions kind of blocking that area, but you can garrison those buildings in between from C. So if you are on the Axis side, you get B and C real quick, you are going to be able to garrison those buildings. But at the same time, if you're on the Allied side, you do have plenty of room to where you can flank out towards the south and work your way up to that Bravo flag, try and get around behind them. And again, this is where maybe your tanks would come into play. They would spawn back in. Maybe the tank placement would play mainly up there around that C flag, because it's going to be a little bit more into the open. So you could have some pretty interesting fights up there as well. But I think this triangular fashion would be a lot more fun for Narvik. And I do recognize that height advantage does definitely hurt it. All right, so that right there is all of the existing maps. Now, I do have a few more. I know you guys are like, holy shit, Brett. Like, are you still talking? Yes, I am. Had a lot of practice for the last couple of years, so here I am. But we're going to go into the existing maps that haven't been made into anything else. They're just conquest maps. So this is going to be Panzerstorm, and this is the first version. I actually have 3 versions of Panzerstorm and 4 versions of Twisted Steel, because I think there's some pretty interesting stuff that you can do on those. But on Panzerstorm here, this one is just a very big map, and it's going to be hard to do. So this one would definitely be one of those maps where I think maybe you can consider putting 2 tanks or possibly a tank and an airplane on this map. I think that it would be big enough to where that could potentially come into play. You could have both air, ground, and armor kind of playing it at that true combined arms feeling, because it is so big. Obviously, you would have to limit the type of planes that would be available, and of course, I'm not a pilot, so I don't know, what would be balanced and what would not. Like I said, I don't claim to know every single balance issue with this, but with this particular map, you are going to be seeing the home flags pretty close to the main spawns. This does allow those teams to get control of those flags right away, and that B flag is going to be obviously the focal point here. Lots of room to flank on both sides of it, so you're not going to be squished out too much. But the vehicles are going to be able to kind of have free range out there, and the infantry really need to be focusing on trying to get onto Bravo and locking that down. Of course, you do have the big slaughterhouse area. I don't know exactly what it is around there, but that they can fight from, and then the artillery positions back to the south of B as well that you can kind of fight in from for those teams. So both of these, I think, are going to be pretty difficult in order to kind of hold a spawn trap, just because I think that it's fairly open. It does kind of lend itself to be able to get out very, very quickly if you have maybe a stag hound, or even if you go for like a plane jet drop, you could go and drop in behind enemy lines if they were. And the map is just so big that it's going to be very difficult for a team to come, maybe if they're spawn trapping on C and you jet drop on A, they're going to have to spawn a guy back on A or back at main spawn in order to make it back there for the defense, and that does take time to do. So this would give that kind of opportunity for another layer of strategy to go, just a little bit something different that we've seen for Squad Conquest. This is a more linear version of this map, so definitely going to be closing it in on the artillery, the slaughterhouse, and then up towards the north there, you have like a granary type thing, a big old silo I know is up there. But this is going to be lending itself more towards, like I said, that the infantry style, so you're going to have more of that happening there into the middle. Probably a slight advantage to the Allied side here than the Axis side, but vehicles will be having areas on the sides of the map in order to push up from. I don't know if you would have a plane on this particular version of the map, just because it is a lot more, it has shrunk down a lot more, but it's definitely something that could be possible, because I think even this version is still bigger than a lot of the other versions of the map that we've looked at and that I've suggested as well. So still very, very big, but it does make it a little bit more compact, a little bit more faster style map. This is going to be another version of that linear style, but this time, kind of like what we saw in Devastation, we're going to be flipping the spawns to the north and south of those flags, and you're kind of going to bleed out and away from your spawn. It's not going to be just you hit one flag, you go to the next one, you go to the next one. This time, you're going to have choices. Do we go for that CB hold, or do we try and go maybe for all three flags at once, or do we go for B and work our way out? You have a lot of different areas that you can kind of push in from. And I definitely think on this version of the map, just have one tank would be plenty, maybe two tanks, but definitely no air in this situation. It's going to be a very compact map that I think that Armor would definitely have a lot of fun on, and I think it would be really fun as well for infantry players, especially on that A-B section of the map. You're going to have a lot of really good fights going back and forth there, as on A, you got to fight up that hill, and on B, of course, with all of those buildings and everything, there's going to be quite a bit there that you're going to have to fight from. Now, as far as like spawn traps on this map, it is going to be a little bit more spawn trappy, just because it is open. It is really, really open. So it would be up to DICE to add in fortifications, maybe some bombed out wreckages of tanks and trucks and some trenches and whatnot, in between the spawns and maybe Bravo, or branching out into C and A between the spawns there, in order to make that a little bit better on those players. All right, so Twisted Steel. And this one right here is, immediately when I saw Twisted Steel and I saw the layout, I was like, this would actually be a really cool Small Conquest map. So this is kind of what we saw before that I was talking about, both of these teams starting basically in a situation where they can kind of fan out to each of these three flags instead of just hitting one flag and then the next flag and then the next flag. They have a lot of choices here. It's not going to be super, super linear, but it is kind of squished in. This one would definitely require maybe some additions of some bridges. So I don't know, maybe you could do some like fortification bridges that we see on Rotterdam Conquest. So if they could add those in, maybe on the Allied side of the map, a couple more in between the B and C flag, right there on the main river coming out of spawn, and then maybe a couple of them as well over on the Axis side. Although that river is going to be a little bit easier for infantry players to get over quick enough, they still, I think, in a couple of those places will have to swim over. So maybe if you designate some areas, that would make it a little bit better. Of course, all the way at the north, they are going to be able to having a pretty decent area where they can kind of push out, both on the Allied side and the Axis side. And I don't think any of the water is deep enough over there that the tanks can pretty much traverse everything on that A flag. But with this one here, I would definitely say that the bridge needs to be kind of cut off. Maybe put some kind of barrier about halfway up the broken sides of the bridge just to prevent players from pushing up in those areas, or maybe even just have the version of the map that grind is, where that bridge is whole and you can use the underside of it in order to move. That would allow players to be able to shoot from it, but they're going to be very, very exposed and easily taken down. So yeah, they do have an advantage with high ground, they have an advantage with sight lines, but they're going to be very easy to pick up too. So it's a really, kind of a big reward, big loss type thing in that situation. Both sides of the map are going to have areas to where you can flank in behind these flags. So on the C side, you can see down in the south where you kind of can get in back behind the flag itself, especially also up there onto that A side as well. B probably needs to be shifted over a little bit more to the left. Again, this was just something that I kind of threw together in the last couple of days. But I think this just would be really, really fun map to play. You have some really cool variations in terms of the terrain on this particular map. The water areas would definitely be interesting to see how the tanks react to that. I could see tanks really not liking it, but I could also see where a good tanker who kind of maps out the routes in his head as to where to go and where to position himself could really take advantage of that. And I would just be really, really interested to see how this would play out. So this is basically the same version that we saw before, but it's a little bit better in terms of a top-down version. As you can see, the flags, they're situated B over here on the left. That typically you do see the flag up a little bit further up to the north, but I would definitely put it down maybe a little bit more towards this home spawn of the Allies. And then that C flag, if it's in the middle of those buildings, it's a little bit closer to those Axis sides. So you kind of have this little off-kilter style where the flags are at, and kind of gives you almost that home flag feel. But again, these teams, they have a wide range of spawns, and in these maps, this is something I forgot to mention, but if you remember back in Battlefield 1, and they may have it in Battlefield 5, but in Battlefield 1, they had double spawns, they had dual spawns, especially in incursions, and that would be something that you would see here. So you would have a left and a right spawn that you could either go towards the B flag or towards the C flag, obviously up to the middle, but you would be able to have your choice as to which side of the map that you're going to be spawning out of at your main. So this right here is the same setup, but it's kind of just shifting down the spawns where the main spawns are going to be at. So on this one right here, the main spawns are going to be a lot closer on both sides. You're going to have both spawns over on each side of the river here for the Allies. On the Axis side, it's going to be a little bit better, but a little bit more narrow overall. And it does give you immediate access into those flags. And this would be a lot tighter map. I mean, this is going to be a lot faster map to get onto those flags right away. Your main focal point obviously is going to be over there onto A, because those spawns are a little bit more opposed of each other. It's going to be a lot further run for the Allies to go to Bravo, a lot further run for the Axis to go to C. And this is probably the tightest map that that I suggested, I think, on Twisted Steel for sure. But this is getting pretty close. And I was thinking, maybe if we had more, high ground play with that C and A, so a lot of land, kind of sticking the swamps and the bogs there onto that B flag, where the tanks would be able to have a little bit more mobility for that A and C push up in that area of the map. They're not going to have to really worry too much about their positioning on B or in getting in the water. Infantry players would be able to get away as well, as you do have that height disparity along the map, so tanks aren't going to have the best sight lines. And then I think on this one right here, you could potentially leave the bridge as is because it's not going to be dominating the maps. I mean, if you have a couple of infantry players up here on B, you could potentially, cut up maybe some pushes that are going to be coming into A, but also you could have some push coming out of main spawn that could come over here. So these guys are going to have to watch a pretty wide swath of area, and then of course you can push up again into that Charlie flag over onto the right flank of the map. All right, so this is the last and final suggestion that I have, and this is going to be for Aerodome. Aerodome is one of those maps where it's just kind of way too open, way too wide. As you can see, I'm using the radar dish there at the top for Bravo. The hangars are going to be on A and C, and then you have that nice little building section that you can fight over with the bombed out planes in the middle for your transitions. I think that vehicles would have a pretty fun time, especially there around that B flag. There's a lot of rocks that they can get behind. There's a lot of terrain differences that you can get behind, that you can duck behind and use to shell out on these long-range sight lines. That A flag and C flag are going to be in those buildings, so you're going to have some pretty interesting and close quarters fights, but I think the really fun ones are going to be in the transition to the A and C flag when those infantry players meet somewhere there in the middle. A lot of bombed out buildings. You're going to be seeing a lot of rockets going back and forth trying to open up as much sightline as possible. And then of course, if the tank owns the section down there towards the south, then obviously they're going to be able to do quite a bit in holding back those teams from either pushing each of the home flags. So anyways, guys, we're going to cut it down here. I've gone on long enough. I think it's been almost an hour long for this video, but I think you get the idea. This is, I just think that DICE, they can come out with better maps. I think that there's potential in what we already have. I think that they have been really, really, I don't want to use the word lazy, but that's really all that I have right now to say. They've just been lazy with putting out this Squad Conquest content. We've had 2 maps with vehicles, and 5 of them are infantry only. 4 of the maps that have come out, the newest maps in a row, have all been infantry only. That's kind of ridiculous, especially when you're talking about Squad Conquest. Again, this is supposed to be, in my opinion, Conquest, vehicles, at least a tank, maybe a plane on it, and we're not seeing any of that. It's domination is what they're turning this game mode into, and it's pretty sickening because there's some really cool stuff that they can do on these maps. So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed the video, you can hit that thumbs up. If not, hit the thumbs down. I appreciate it if you hung in there for as long as you did, and we'll see you in the next one, whenever that one may be.